being a big Beatles fan, I'm up for most Beatles documentaries that come out. There's always more stories to be told. Every aspect of their existence has been explored in a book, and I'll read most of them. And this latest documentary I've been hearing about for a while, and I just finally was able to watch it streaming, is Borrowed Time, Lennon's Last Decade. This is about John Lennon's last decade of life, which is 1970 to 1980, and it really just digs into his solo years. It doesn't have a lot of celebrity guests in this documentary. At first I was a little nervous. I'm like, is this going to just be a bunch of critics and hangers-on and a lot of, I was a little worried when it opened because it was using a lot of AI footage or AI creations of some guy that kind of looked like John Lennon in the in stills and things like that. I'm like, oh, is this going to be, because there's a lot of documentaries that have very little to work with, but they're just trying to get by on a very saleable element in them or subject matter. This overcame that. This did use some AI and some fanciful visualizations of things that don't exist, but, and it couldn't really use any of his music. And which is a little weird, because at the end there's just some like song that is just by some person, and just like something from Lennon would have been better, but I understand the impossibilities of dealing with the estate and rights and finances and all that stuff. So what we get here are some people who were friends with John Lennon, some people who worked with him in his later years, and a couple, critics or writers, but people that I'd never heard from before who were telling very interesting stories. You get a lot of personal photos. You get a lot of news. Now, and again, I've been a Beatle fan for decades, and I've been a Beatle bootleg collector for decades. So when something comes up that I've never seen before, you've got my attention. And this has access to a lot of like interviews and news footage that I had never seen before. And critically, it gets into something until this documentary came out I had no idea about, which was the fact that John Lennon was planning to do a major world tour backing the Double Fantasy album, to the degree where he was interviewing and talking with and working with a guy who was going to design the stage and the layout and the look of the show. He was talking to, they talked to one of the guys who played on Double Fantasy, who was tapped to be, guitarist on that tour. And they get into that. They put that right up front because it is kind of like the big aha of this documentary that people hadn't really heard much about before, which seemed a little weird structurally to me that that's up front and then later we rejoin that information. But it is kind of a grabber if you're a fan, because again, I haven't read every book about Lennon or every book about the Beatles, but I'm pretty well versed, I'd like to say, at this point, and that was news to me. So this is fairly long. It's 2 hours, a little over 2 hours. If you're not a serious fan, it might not be of serious interest to you, but if you're a Beatle fan like I'm a Beatle fan, it's very interesting. We all know how it ends, unfortunately, but other than that, it has a very upbeat, very positive portrayal of the man for the most part. He had his flaws, and it doesn't really dig into the dirt too much, and it's just really interesting, and it was information I didn't know. So if you're a Beatle fan, streaming now is Borrowed Time, Lennon's Last Decade.